Okay, solving absolute values, equations and inequalities. We'll do a couple of each, talk about some special cases, and move on from there. So the biggest thing to remember is absolute value means that it's the distance from 0. So whatever is inside this absolute value means that it's 7 away from 0. And again, coming back to the number line that we talked about, if we're talking about distance from 0, you can be 7 to the right or 7 to the left. But because of this, we know then that 9 minus 4x is either going to equal 7, or 9 minus 4x is going to equal a negative 7. Because again, if 9 minus 4x is equal to negative 7, that's inside the absolute value bars. You take the absolute value of negative 7 to get 7. And now you're just going to solve these two equations. Move the 9. Just make sure that obviously you're doing the math correctly, because sometimes it's easy to get wrapped up in all of the craziness and make small mistakes. Divide through by negative 4, and please reduce, so I get 1/2. On the other side, again, same steps, subtract 9, divide by negative 4. Different results because you're doing the negative 7 instead of the positive 7. So then you get x equals 4. So then in set notation, you've got 1/2 and 4. And that is your solution for that. Now, what do we do if you get a case like this? These two values are the same, so they're both negative, in which case their absolute value is going to be the same. Or one's negative, one's positive, in which case, again, you take the absolute values of it being the same. So the two equations that you're going to solve out for here, and I'm not going to finish this all the way out. 3x plus 2 is going to equal x minus 5. Or they're going to be opposites. Now, this is where the mistakes can happen. When you do the opposite, please make sure that you put a parentheses around the entire side. Okay, I understand, yes, you could probably write it down as the opposite of x plus 5, but people can make mistakes. So then you would go ahead and change this one then in the next step. 3x plus 2 is equal to the opposite of x plus 5. And then solve that out. Okay, just like what you would have done back in the previous chapters. Now, when you're dealing with inequalities, okay, there are two special things here. Sorry, I'm just making sure I have the right stuff there. Two things that are going on. Here you're talking about, okay, the distance from 0 has to be less than 10. Okay, which means it's somewhere between 0 and 10. Now, since we're talking about distance, that means I can also go 10 in the other direction and go from somewhere. So that means that this whole thing, the 4x minus 6, is somewhere between negative 10 and 10. Okay, and you can write it in one line. The way that I have you guys remember this is that if it's less than, it means you do it in the line segment. So it's one continuous line segment. You can do everything all at one shot. Add 6 to both sides. So now are all three sections, I guess. Negative 4 is going to be less than or equal to 4x, which is less than or equal to, why am I doing less than or equal to? My apologies. Got ahead of myself. So negative 4 is less than negative 4x, which is less than 16. So negative 4, or it can be negative 1 by the time I divide this out. Let's just get rid of that. See what happens when you work too fast? All right, so we're dividing everything through by 4, so I get negative 1 is less than x, which is less than 4. Now, in terms of writing this down, like we talked about in section 1.7, you're going to be asked to do this in interval notation. So that is going to be your final answer. Okay, you need to write it in such a way that we're saying, okay, we're going to start at negative 1. Anything bigger than negative 1 goes all the way to 4. Now, what's the difference between that and having a greater than sign? The difference is this. We're talking about the distances away from 0. So we're saying it has to be bigger than 10, which means it has to be somewhere over here, or something bigger than negative 10, because that says distance 10, so it has to be somewhere over there. So it's broken up into two different parts. The way that I remember, okay, the way that I suggest that you remember that is that you're going to say greater than gives you a gap. See how I have a gap between negative 10 and 10, so that means you're going to break this down into two different parts, okay? Which means that 4x minus 6 has to be bigger than 10. That's taking care of the right side. Or 4x minus 6 is less than 10, negative 10, okay, which is over on this side. Now, some people have always asked, well, can I just write this in 1? Don't write this down, but let me show you anyway. Well, can't I just do it this way? Negative 10 is greater than 4x minus 6 is greater than 10. When you do this, you're going to get some sort of statement. Again, you're going to get the negative 1 and 4s. And you're going to end up with something where it's going to end up at negative 1 is greater than or equal to x, which is greater than or equal to 4. So you're saying I have some number that is both less than negative 1 and greater than 4, which is not true. And no matter how much you say it, well, Mr. Hayes, I'll go ahead and change it, and I'll make sure I do it. People don't. People make mistakes. They're going to write it down wrong, and so do it the way that I'm asking you to do it. Separate it out, and you can get fancy once you become really, really good at this, but you're not at that point. So I get 4x is greater than 16. X has to be bigger than 4. Okay. Over here, I get 4x is less than negative 4. So that means that x is going to be less than negative 1. So in terms of writing this down, I've got two different parts. You've got a gap. In your answer, you're going to have a union. The part that's less than negative 1, you're going to start at negative infinity and go up to, but not include, negative 1. You're going to join that up with numbers that are bigger than 4. So you've got 4, comma, infinity. And that is your answer there. Okay. Last thing, couple of special case. In this case, read this before you do anything else. Whenever you get an absolute value dealing with a negative that's equal to or greater than or less than a negative number, stop and look at it first. What makes sense? Absolute value, the distance from 0 is bigger than negative 2. The absolute value of x, by definition, has to be bigger than or equal to 0. So this is always true. It doesn't matter what value of x I plug in, it's going to work. Okay? This is always true for all values of x. So we're just going to say, all right, well, that means everything, all real numbers, from negative infinity to positive infinity. Now, likewise, down here, remember, absolute value of x has to be bigger than or equal to 0. This can't happen. You cannot have an absolute value that's less than a negative number. So that means you've got the big null set going on. Because no matter what value I plug in for x in here, this is always going to come out to be a positive answer, and there's no way a positive answer can be less than or equal to a negative answer. So when you're dealing with absolute values, when you have a negative number on one side, slow down, make sure that you're not making any serious mistakes.